Harlem, 1952. Some lines you don't cross, some people you don't touch, and some mistakes you only make once. The summer heat hung over 145th Street like a wet blanket, turning the sidewalks into griddles and the tenement buildings into ovens. Mame Johnson was walking home from the market, paper bags in both arms, when she heard the voice behind her, white Southern, dripping with the kind of entitlement that came from generations of never being told no. Well, well, what do we have here? She kept walking. After 23 years as Bumpy Johnson's wife, she knew how to handle herself, knew when to engage and when to keep moving. This was a keep moving moment, but the man grabbed her arm. "I'm talking to you." Mame turned slowly. The kid couldn't have been more than 19. Blonde hair slicked back with too much pomade, cheap suit that didn't fit right, and eyes that held the particular stupidity of someone who, I'd never faced real consequences. Behind him stood two others, cut from the same cloth, grinning like they'd just discovered fire. "Let go of my arm," Mamie said quietly. The kid's grip tightened. "Or what you gonna call your husband?" He laughed. "Oh wait, I heard about him, big bad Bumpy Johnson. Heard he's been in Alcatraz so long people forgot his name. Heard the Italians run everything now. Heard..." Mame didn't wait for him to finish. She dropped both grocery bags, grabbed his pinky finger, and bent it back until she heard the snap. The kid screamed and dropped to his knees. The two friends rushed forward, but old Mr. Peterson from the corner store was already there. Baseball bat in hand, 6 other men materialized from doorways and shop fronts. The two friends suddenly remembered. They had somewhere else to die. B.A.T. The kid was still on his knees, cradling his broken finger, tears streaming down his face. Mame picked up her grocery bags, several cans of beans rolling across the sidewalk. She looked down at him with something close to pity. "What's your name, child?" "Tommy. Tommy Patterson." "And where are you from?" "Tommy Patterson, Alabama." He was hyperventilating now. "My daddy's..." "I don't care who your daddy is, but your daddy's gonna care about what happened here today. Not because of your finger, that'll heal, but because you just made the biggest mistake of your short, stupid life." She walked away. Behind her, the kid kept talking to Mr. Peterson, still trying to make himself important. "My father's Robert Patterson, head of the Alabama Klan. He's got connections up here. Businesses, people who..." Mr. Peterson just shook his head. "Boy, you should have kept your mouth shut and your hands to yourself." By nightfall, the story had spread through Harlem like wildfire. Some white kid from Alabama, son of a Klan leader, had put hands on Bumpy Johnson's wife, and Bumpy Johnson was coming home in 6 days. See, here's what you need to understand about Bumpy Johnson. The man had been in Alcatraz for 11 years on a drug conspiracy charge that everyone knew was fabricated. The feds wanted him off the streets, and the Italians wanted him out of the way while they carved up his territory. But even from inside the rock, even from a cell overlooking the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay, Bumpy Johnson's name carried weight. His reputation was a living thing, growing larger with every year he was gone, fed by the stories old-timers told and the respect that lingered like smoke in every Harlem bar and policy bank. And now someone had violated the most sacred rule in his world. They'd touched his wife. Robert Patterson was a big man in Alabama. He ran the Montgomery Clavern, owned 3 lumber mills, and had 2 congressmen in his pocket. He believed in white supremacy, the way other men believed in God, with absolute certainty and no room for doubt. When his business partners in New York told him there were opportunities up north, real estate deals, construction projects, policy operations that the Italians were willing to cut him in on, he'd sent his youngest son Tommy to learn the ropes. Tommy was supposed to keep his head down, watch, and learn. Instead, he'd grabbed the wrong woman's arm on the wrong street in the wrong city. The phone call came 3 days later. Patterson was in his office at the mill, watching crews haul pine logs onto trucks when his secretary buzzed him. "Sir, There's a man on the line. Says it's urgent, won't give his name. Patterson picked up, annoyed. Who is this? This is someone trying to save your son's life. The voice was calm, measured, with the faint lilt of the islands underneath. Your boy Tommy made a mistake. He put his hands on a woman he shouldn't have touched. Now there's a situation developing, and you need to get him out of New York tonight. Patterson's face went red. Who the hell do you think you're talking to? My son is conducting business up there, legitimate business, and if your son assaulted Mame Johnson, Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson's wife. Bumpy gets out of Alcatraz in 3 days. You understand what I'm telling you? The name hit Patterson like cold water. Even in Alabama, even in the heart of Klan country, certain names carried across state lines. Bumpy Johnson was one of them. The Negro gangster who had gone toe-to-toe with Dutch Schultz and Lucky Luciano, who'd turned Harlem into his own private kingdom before the feds finally found a charge that would stick. I heard he was finished, Patterson said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Heard the Italians took everything. You heard wrong. Bumpy's been planning his return for 11 years. Every detail, every move, every piece of his old empire is ready to snap back into place the moment he touches ground in New York. And the first thing he's going to do when he gets home is deal with the man who put hands on his wife. Your son has a week to live, unless you do exactly what I tell you. Patterson's hands were shaking. He'd ordered beatings, intimidated witnesses, watched men hang from trees, but this was different. This was someone else's territory, someone else's rules, someone else's power. What do you want? Get him out of New York tonight, and you come up here yourself. You've got business partners in the city, Italians who cut you in on their operations. You're going to call in every favor you have. You're going to ask them to talk to Bumpy, to negotiate, to buy your son's life with money or territory or whatever it takes. Because if you don't, Tommy Patterson is going to disappear into Harlem, and you're never going to find enough pieces to bury. The line went dead. Patterson stared at the phone for a long moment. Then he made the call. Tommy was on a train south by midnight, broken finger and all, crying and protesting that he hadn't done anything wrong, that the woman was nobody, that his daddy's friends would protect him. Patterson didn't explain. He just put him on the train and watched it pull out of Pennsylvania Station with something close to relief. Then he made the other calls, to Vito Genovese's people, to Frank Costello's operation, to every Italian connection he had in New York City, calling in favors, offering money, asking for a meeting with Bumpy Johnson to negotiate his son's mistake away. And that's when he learned something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In Harlem, nobody negotiated with Bumpy Johnson. You followed his rules or you paid his price. There was no middle ground. Bumpy Johnson walked out of Alcatraz on June 15, 1952, wearing the same gray suit he'd worn going in, 11 years older and 10 pounds lighter. His hair had gone mostly gray, and the lines around his eyes had deepened into crevices. But when he stepped onto the ferry heading back to San Francisco, his back was straight and his eyes were clear. He'd spent 4,000 days planning this moment, every detail, every move, every piece of the chess game that would restore his empire. But first, there was family business to attend to. He flew into New York on June 16th. Mame met him at the airport, and they held each other for a long time without speaking. Finally, she pulled back and looked at him. You heard? I heard. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. You okay? I'm fine. Broke his finger. He went crying back to Alabama. Bumpy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Good. Now, tell me everything. Over dinner in their apartment on Edgecombe Avenue, Mame told him the whole story. The grocery bags, the grab, the voice dripping with Southern supremacy, the name. Robert, Patterson's son. The fact that Patterson was connected to the Italian operations in Harlem. that he'd been given a piece of the policy banks while Bumpy was inside, that he was now desperately trying to arrange a meeting to negotiate peace. Bumpy listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "The Italians gave him a piece of my territory while you were gone, yes, and now he wants to negotiate. He's scared. He knows what's coming." Bumpy nodded slowly. "He should be, but not for the reason he thinks." The meeting was set for June 20th at Club Baron on 132nd Street, neutral ground. Robert Patterson arrived with 2 lawyers and a briefcase full of cash. He'd been told Bumpy Johnson might be willing to accept compensation for the insult, that money could smooth this over, that business relationships could be preserved. He was wrong. Bumpy arrived alone. No bodyguards, no weapons visible. He wore a black suit, crisp white shirt, and thin black tie. He moved through the empty club like he owned it. Because he did. Patterson stood up from the booth, hand extended. Smile forced. Bumpy didn't take his hand. He just sat down across from him and waited. Patterson cleared his throat. "Mr. Johnson, I appreciate you agreeing to meet. My son made a terrible mistake. He's young, he's stupid, and he didn't know who your wife was. I've sent him back to Alabama, and he won't be returning to New York. I hope we can settle this like businessmen." He pushed the briefcase across the table. "There's $50,000 in there. Consider it an apology and compensation for the disrespect shown to your family." "I think that's more than fair." Bumpy looked at the briefcase but didn't touch it. "How much of my territory do you own?" Patterson blinked. "I'm sorry. The policy banks, the numbers racket, the Italians gave you a piece while I was gone." "How much?" "Free banks, small operations. It's just business, Mr. Johnson, nothing personal." "Nothing personal." Bumpy's voice was soft. "You take a man's life's work, divide it up like spoils of war while he's locked in a cage, and it's just business. Then your son puts his hands on his wife, and you think $50,000 makes it right." Patterson's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. One of them spoke up. "Mr. Johnson, we're here in good faith to—" Bumpy's eyes never left Patterson. "I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the man who raised a son stupid enough to touch my wife and arrogant enough to think his daddy's name would protect him." The silence stretched out. Finally, Patterson spoke. "What do you want? I want you to understand something. Your son is alive right now because of geography. He's in Alabama, under your protection, surrounded by your people. If he was still in New York, he'd be dead already, and there's nothing you could do to stop it. Not your money, not your lawyers, not your clan connections, nothing." Bumpy leaned forward. "But here's what's going to happen instead. You're going to give me back my 3 policy banks, all of them, tonight. Then you're going to call every Italian connection you have in this city and tell them that Robert Patterson is done in New York. No more deals, no more partnerships, no more business. You take your money and your son and you stay south of the Mason-Dixon line forever." Patterson's face went white. Those banks are worth more than your son's life." Bumpy's voice was still quiet, but something in it made the air feel colder. "Because that's the choice. The banks and your reputation, or Tommy Patterson breathing past his 20th birthday." One of the lawyers tried again. "Mr. Johnson, you have to understand. Our client has significant investments here, relationships that—" Bumpy finally looked at the lawyer, really looked at him. The lawyer stopped talking. "I spent 11 years in Alcatraz," Bumpy said. 11 years in a cell so small I could touch both walls without stretching. 11 years watching the sun rise over water I couldn't reach. 11 years planning every move of my return. And in all that time, you know what kept me going." Nobody answered, knowing that when I got out, everything would go back to the way it was, my streets, my people, my rules, and the first rule, the most important rule, the one that matters more than money or territory or power, is that you respect family, you protect family, and anybody who violates that rule pays in full. He stood up. You've got 24 hours to transfer the policy banks. After that, I stop protecting your son. And Mr. Patterson, let me make this clear. I can reach Alabama. I can reach anywhere. There is no place safe enough, no protection strong enough. If your son ever sets foot in New York again, if you ever conduct business in Harlem again, if I even hear your family name spoken on my streets, the deal is off. Are we clear? Patterson nodded, his throat too dry to speak. Bumpy walked out. He left the $50,000 sitting on the table untouched. By the next evening, the three policy banks were back under Bumpy's control. Robert Patterson closed his New York operations and returned to Alabama, where he quietly told his Klan associates that the Fink North was closed to them. Tommy Patterson never left Montgomery again, and the story spread through Harlem like a gospel. Bumpy Johnson had come home, and the rules were back in effect. Touch his family, lose everything. But here's the part that became legend. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at Robert Patterson's home in Alabama. Inside was a medical bill for Tommy Patterson's broken finger, 47 from Harlem Hospital's emergency room. There was no note, just the bill, and underneath it, in careful handwriting, paid in full. It was Bumpy's way of saying, I could have taken everything, including your son's life. Instead, I took what was mine and charged you for the lesson. Be grateful for the mercy. Patterson kept that bill in his desk drawer until the day he died, a reminder that some men you can't buy, can't intimidate, can't outmaneuver. Some men operate by a code so strict, so absolute, that the only smart move is to stay out of their way. Bumpy Johnson was that kind of man. See, this story isn't really about revenge. It's about respect. It's about understanding that power isn't just about violence or money or connections. Real power is knowing exactly how much force is necessary and using exactly that much. No more, no less. Bumpy could have had Tommy Patterson killed, could have turned Robert Patterson's empire to ashes, but he didn't need to. He just needed to remind everyone of the rules. And in doing so, he sent a message that echoed from Harlem to Alabama to every corner where his name was known. Bumpy Johnson was back, and the old order was restored. The policy banks thrived under his control again. The Italians, who'd been so eager to carve up his territory, suddenly remembered that they had other priorities. The streets were safer. The numbers had ran cleaner, and Mame Johnson walked through Harlem without anyone so much as looking at her wrong, because everyone understood that she was untouchable. That's the power of a man who keeps his word. That's the power of a code honored, absolutely. That's the power of knowing that mercy, strategically applied, is more terrifying than violence, because violence is simple, violence is predictable, but mercy from a man capable of terrible things, that's a gift, and everyone knows you don't waste a gift like that. The story became part of Harlem's oral history. Old-timers tell it to young hustlers as a lesson. Intelligence over impulse, strategy over rage, calculated mercy over blind revenge. It's a story about a man who spent 11 years planning his return and executed it so perfectly that he reclaimed his empire without firing a single shot. It's a story about understanding that true power doesn't announce itself, it doesn't need to, it simply is. So what about you? What would you have done if someone disrespected your family, violated the most sacred boundary? Would you have the discipline to respond with precision instead of rage? Would you have the strategic mind to understand that sometimes taking everything means showing restraint? Would you have the confidence to walk away from $50,000 because money was never the point? Those are the questions that separate kings from pretenders. And Bumpy Johnson was a king. If this story taught you something about power, respect, or strategic thinking, hit that like button. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Would you have accepted the money, or would you have done what Bumpy did? And subscribe because we've got more stories about the men and women who built empires through intelligence, patience, and an unbreakable code. These are the legends history tried to forget, but we're bringing them back, one story at a time. Until next time, remember, respect isn't given, it's earned, and once earned, it's protected at all costs.